Lance Roberts is with us, Chief Investment Officer, RIA Advisors. Thank you so much for being with us. So
Absolutely.
Would you call this bull market? It's so hard to know when it started, but because we've had dips and pullbacks, but people bought those dips. So I don't know when you think this bull market started, but we are hitting record highs in this last week for the S&P and NASDAQ. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, this bull market started back in October of 2022 and has been pretty much entrenched since then. And it's been actually it's been very interesting because we've seen just a tremendous amount of retail speculation in the markets. We've seen a massive increase in the number of retail investors getting into ETFs and single stock ETFs and leveraged ETFs. There's a lot of momentum behind this market, and there's nothing really stopping it right now. We saw recently the whole tariff kind of issue. That was quickly resolved. You had a near 20% decline, followed by a 25% advance, one of the fastest in history. We haven't seen that kind of action since back when we had the pandemic shutdown in March of 2020.
So at this point now, when we think about the recent performance of the Mag 7, which many of these names have helped make the new highs on the major averages, names like Nvidia, is there a name within the Mag 7? I mean, if you had to sort of rank them, do you have the 1, 2, 3 slot for the future? Not what they've done so far, that we can all look up, but for the future, which ones do you think are best position of the Mag 7?
Well, I think you were talking about two of them a second ago going to the break. Nvidia and Meta, obviously, they're on the forefront of what's happening with a lot of the AI. Meta just bought Luxottica to develop the further development of their glasses. The future of AI and what's coming, this reminds me a lot. I'm really old, so I remember the whole 1999 .com bubble, et cetera. And this reminds me a lot of that. Back then there was a lot of naysayers about the internet. It's just a fad. We know what the internet's done since then. AI is pretty much in that same space. So, when you start thinking about the future of what you want to own, and I would look past the Mag 7. It's more of the Mag 3 as of late. It's been Nvidia, it's been Meta, it's been Microsoft. Those are the players in that space. Tesla obviously has had its challenges this year. But then you start looking out beyond that, the power generation companies, the companies building the infrastructure for these big data centers, because these aren't just data centers, these are data factories. And the bigger you build these factories, the more revenue you create from them. And this is going to be a big issue going forward. The power needs for that, the infrastructure, and then not only that, but then the developers of the AI themselves, like Palantir, Palo Alto Network, cybersecurity. There's going to be lots of advantages and opportunities in this market.
And what do you tell the people who want to see like the 40%, 60%, 100% gains? Should the expectations be more like 10% and be happy with that?
Well, I think you need to temper your expectations. We've seen, just since the April lows, right? We've seen companies like Palantir up 60%. And we're seeing a lot of that retail speculation coming into the markets. And that's always a bit of a dangerous thing. I was listening to your previous guest, David, really smart guy. He's absolutely right about a lot of stuff he's saying. But we're seeing a lot of increased risk taking in the markets. And that typically sets the markets up for a correction of some sort that tends to impact those speculating the most. So, it's really important to, pick good quality fundamental companies, taper your expectations a bit, manage your risk in your portfolio, be careful with leverage and a lot of these things that investors are taking on, because those can lead to catastrophic unrecoverable losses. And we'll see that again at some point in the future, just like we saw in 2008, just like we saw in 1999. That will happen at some point. I'm not saying when, I don't know when, nobody does, but it's important to manage the risk that you're taking with your money.
Understood. I mean, at this point now, we think about GDP and inflation. What do you think happens there? I mean, why is it important, that GDP is going higher and inflation's coming down for the Mag 7 in particular?
Well, it's not just in particular for the Mag 7, this is important, but what markets base future expectations on, right? David talked about a second ago, we're trading at 22 times earnings, richly valued for this market. But what markets are trading off of is expectations for forward earnings growth, right? So how strong will earnings be in the future? Well, earnings come from economic activity. That's what creates revenue for companies that generate the earnings for the company's bottom lines. Inflation impacts their profit margins. So lower inflation and stronger economic growth gives the markets an opportunity to look forward to higher rates of expectations for earnings, which allows the markets to overvalue themselves in the near term, hoping that we'll kind of grow into those valuations over time. So, the fact we're seeing some stronger economic growth expectations from the Fed is encouraging, but we are seeing there is a deviation right now between economic growth, which is weaker than what the earnings expectations are going forward. So one of those two aren't right, and we just don't know which one is not right yet.
Right. And when people talk about investing in sectors, obviously these Mag 7 names are doing pretty great. You think the bull market continues. When we think about other sectors, do you have other sectors that seem sort of stand out to you?
Yeah. No, in particular, really like the power generation sectors. And, I'm full disclosure, we have holdings in GE Vernova as an example. They are kind of in that nuclear energy space. That's going to be a demand in the future because so much power requirement for AI. That's going to be the big hurdle. Another sector to look at is pipeline companies. Again, we own a company called Kinder Morgan Energy as an example. They actually own the pipelines, and a lot of these data centers are having to do what's called behind the meter, and they're having to attach directly to pipelines in order to develop the energy they need because the electric grid isn't developed enough to deliver the amount of energy that they need. And it's not just AI. Don't forget, you need a huge amount of energy for Bitcoin mining. And we're seeing this whole movement for cryptocurrencies, et cetera. That's another big power demand need that's going forward. So, definitely look beyond the Mag 7 and look at infrastructure for building out the actual infrastructure for the electric grid, the power generation systems to deliver the power for these data centers, for Bitcoin mining, for households, because we've just so much more technology in households now. And then look in the finance sector as well. Companies like BlackRock, as an example, another holding we have, they're a big investor in the infrastructure and AI space. So lots of plays outside of just the Mag 7 that will benefit from the AI development.
Okay. Anything I'm leaving out here? Final quick thought.
No, I think you pretty much covered, but I think the big thing is look, these have been very, very good markets over the last couple of years, even despite the bumps. But don't take on, I'm seeing a lot of excess risk taking by clients that we work with and prospects that we're talking to. I'm seeing a lot of risk taking that I haven't seen really in quite some time. And that typically always ends up badly at some point. So we're going to have another 5 or a 10 or 15% correction at some point. That's just the nature of markets. Volatility is a function of markets over time. So just make sure that you're watching your portfolio and managing that risk exposure because we are seeing a lot of exuberance kind of coming back to the markets very quickly.
All right. Lance Roberts, Chief Investment Officer of RIA Advisors. Good to see you, Lance. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you.